Hey everybody, how's everybody doing tonight? Glad to see you guys here. We had a little glitch there with the LinkedIn thing, so I had to kind of back it out and then redo it again. So I apologize for that. Let me fix my camera. Also, I want to apologize if you hear my dogs because they're up in the front of the house and my wife just went outside to check on something. And so you may hear them bark. That's just part of living with two German Shepherds. So yeah, it is. See what I tell you? See? They want to be part of the show as well. They're my cable dogs. Yeah. So hold on one second. Okay. So as always, hold on one second. Wait for them to calm down. Just a tiny bit of second there. So while we're doing that, what questions do you have? What questions? Okay, hopefully they stopped. There we go. For those who just kind of tuned in late, my dogs are barking and it sounds like they're getting ready to do it again. The challenges of working from home sometimes. So we always start off every show with, what are you drinking? What are you drinking? So Chuck is drinking water with lemon drop essential oil. Now, the reason I'm drinking this is because, as you probably know, about a month ago, I had kidney stone removed, and I had my follow-up visit this week with the doctor, and he said I need to drink more citrus, and he suggested water with lemon juice. I said, what about lemon essential oil? He says, that works. So there you go, because I don't want to go through that process again. I see George has already anticipated my next question. What are you guys drinking tonight? So put your answer in the chat box. He's drinking vanilla root beer. Vanilla root beer. In case you missed it, I did an interview with George Humphrey this week's episode. George got his A+ certification, so we discussed his journey on how he got to getting that certification. George is a pretty unique person. I'm glad to know him. So let's see. What is Fernando drinking? He's cheers from Canada. He's just drinking water with ice. That's okay, Fernando. What part of Canada are you from? I do go to Canada every once in a blue moon to teach. I've been to Ontario. I've been to Smiths Falls. I've been to Quebec. I have taught in all different kinds of places in Canada. I love Canada. I love the people. I don't like going across the border because it's a pain in the neck when you got equipment. So yeah, there you go. Now, let's see. So everybody's telling what they're drinking. Remember, we can put your questions in so we know what questions you have. That way we can help answer that kind of stuff. I do want to do something a little different, and I'm going to start doing this from now on. I want to do an acronym challenge. An acronym challenge. If you think you know the answer to this, please put it in the chat box. What does PHZ mean? PHZ. What does that actually mean? Our industry loves acronyms, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know every weekday morning at 8:10, I do a acronym challenge. Acronym challenge. So there's this one has not been broadcasted at all on LinkedIn, so this is unique to just this show. What does PHZ mean? And if you're smart, you know that means petahertz. Petahertz. Petahertz is equal to 1 quadrillion hertz. 1 quadrillion hertz. I want to do a public announcements. Help control the acronym population. Have your acronyms spayed or neutered. We have enough acronyms. We don't need any more. We can get rid of some of our acronyms now. Right? You agree with me? What say you guys? I think we have enough acronyms. Why do we keep coming up with new ones? So actually, George guessed phased hertz. Nope, it was petahertz. Not to be confused with petahertz. People for the ethical treatment of acronyms. There you go. Yes. So again, remember, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box so we can answer them. I do have a bunch of questions left over from last week's show. And of course, any questions that you might pose to me this week as well. So the first question I wanted to cover was one that was posted on the tail end of last week's show, and I missed it. And then I closed out the show, and then I saw it afterwards. And then I told the gentleman that I would address it in this week's show. So here we go. And his question: how much RCD make? That's like asking how much does a hen weigh? It depends. It really, really depends. There's a lot of factors that go into salary. Let's talk about a couple of those, right? So first one is, and I don't really trust when you see people like Indeed and all those resume places, they tell you what the salaries are, because people don't like telling you what their salary is. So I kind of don't halfway trust those, but at least it's some number. People don't, and if somebody asks me what my salary is, I don't tell them. It's none of their business, right? Even if it's under the guise of anonymity, I don't tell people what my salary is. It's none of their business, period. But let's talk about some of those factors, right? The first one is, how much RCDD experience do you have? What I mean by that is, did you just get your RCDD yesterday? Or have you been in RCDD since 1998 or 1999? I can't remember the year I got mine. So I got 20 years as an RCDD experience. Can somebody who's got 20 years as an RCDD expect to get paid the same or more than somebody who literally just got their RCDD yesterday? So that's one of the factors, right? And then another one of the factors is, what other certifications or education do you have with that certification? Are you an A+ certified like George is? Do you have a college degree? Do you have a 4-year degree? Do you have a master's degree? Do you have a PhD? Or are you an engineer, an electrical engineer, right? Those are all additional training and learning that you can get, certifications and formal training and formal schooling that you can get, that if someone has that and an RCDD, they could expect to make somebody more than who only just has an RCDD, right? So that's a factor as well. And then another factor is, where do you live? Where do you live? Now, just so you kind of know, right? If you live in New York, you can certainly expect to make more as an RCDD than somebody who lives in Birmingham, Alabama, right? Because the cost of living is a little bit more in New York City. Although with the pandemic and stuff now, people are not evacuating. It's not a good term. They're leaving the cities because they're doing all this remote workforce. And why pay the exuberant costs of rent? Pay $2,000 for rent on a place when $2,000 can buy you a place somewhere else. So I did find a website which actually lists out, hey, Bill, how you doing? I did find a place that lists out RCDD salary by state. RCDD salary by state. So if you go to bit.ly.com/RCDD salary, you will look up your state and you'll find the average salary by state. Not necessarily your salary, because when I looked at the Florida salary, it was not reflective of what I actually make. I'm not going to say if I made more or made less, because it's none of your business. But it kind of gives you an idea. If you're trying to weigh the option, do I want to spend $1,500 to get your certification? Do you want to spend to sit in that class and then another $500 for your certification and all that stuff? Is what kind of return can you expect on that investment? I'm going to tell you right now, it's worth the investment, especially if you've got years left in your career. Now, if you're retiring next year, financially, maybe not, right? You're not going to gather, you may or may not. It just kind of really all depends, right? So then the next one is, what do you do as an RCDD? Let's see, an RCDD is just a general term, right? You can be a project manager with an RCDD. You can be an estimator with an RCDD. You can be a trainer like I am with an RCDD, right? Or you can even be a technician. I've come across technicians in the field who have their RCDD. They were a technician, they passed the exam, and they just hadn't had the chance to get promoted, go to another job. So I've come across technicians. Can a technician realistically expect to make how much a project manager makes? No. And the reason is because the responsibilities for each of those job functions is going to vary, right? And so, for example, project manager is managing people. Generally, the more people you manage, the more money you're going to make. And so that's a factor in that as well. And also another factor, and I just kind of thought of this one off the top of my head. If you're a profit center, right? So project manager is a good example of that. Their whole job is to watch the labor and the material budgets and make sure they come in on budget or under budget. So they have a profit function to them. Right now, me as a trainer, I don't have a profit function. trainer expect to make as much project. They're both RCDDs. Maybe, maybe not. It just kind of depends on the company. And that's another factor, the company. Some companies are willing to pay more for RCDDs than others. If you have a company that they're starting to get a lot of bids and they're seeing in the bids that they have to have RCDDs on staff and they don't have any, they might be willing to shell out a little bit more money for that first RCDD. But if it's a big company, like I used to work for a nationwide contract, if you know me, you know who that company is, right? When I left the company, I think they had like 25 RCDDs. We were a dime a dozen in that company. So are they going to pay as much for their RCDD as a company who's willing to get that first one in? That's a good question. The only person who can answer that question would be that company. Remember, don't put your questions in the chat box too. So that's another one of those factors. And then there's another one is ancillary factors. What I mean, do you have something about it that nobody else does? For example, when I used to work in the DC area, I used to have a security clearance. I'm not going to say what the security clearance level that I had because it's none yet. But because I got that security clearance and I had an RCDD, I got paid more than an RCDD who didn't have that security clearance, right? Because I could go to places, I could go into buildings that other RCDDs can't go. And there's a premium that you can attach to that, right? And then, so there's some information out there that they can tell you how much an RCD can make. So if I did a research on this and I came across ZipRecruiter, and I found that the U.S. average for an RCDD is $94,000. $94,000. It started at $48,000 and went all the way up to I think $128,000. I think $138,000, something like that. So the average was like $94,000. That's the U.S. average. But like I said, you can expect to make more or less depending on what state you're in. So, for example, the thing I got right down here, the salary for your state, if you pull up that link and you look at it, you'll notice that the RCDDs in Massachusetts make on average, $98,000. An RCDD in Florida is only going to make $72,000. Again, cost of living, right? So if you're living in Boston or a suburb of Boston, you cost more for houses and taxes and groceries. Here in West Central Florida, in the Withlacoochee State Forest, well, we grow our own food and our property is pretty cheap when you compare it to some of the other places. So those are all factors that kind of go into that whole decision process, right? So that answers that first question, right? So then the next question, and this one actually kind of relates to the first question, and this came via comment on YouTube, and it said, career-wise, does an RCDD in the telecom industry make about as much as an electrical engineer with a PE license working in the power systems design? All things being equal, okay? I just went through a whole list of factors. Everything else being equal, you both have the same amount of formal education, you both have the same years experience as RCDD, and all that other stuff. The answer to that question is no. A PE with a license, on average, you're going to make about $109,000. Again, this is according to Indeed.com, one of the salary pages. So it's a little bit harder to get that PE license and become an electrical engineer. So you're going to make more. Now, so for those who are studying for the RCD exam, right, how much more can you expect to actually make? You know, if you're a technician now in the field and you're making $45,000 or $50,000, and let's say that you live in Florida, right, like I do, and you get that you get that RCD, can you expect your salary bump to $72,000? Probably not. Most cases, probably not. You can expect a bump, right? How much of the bump? Again, it depends on the company, right? Just kind of as an example, and this is based on 1998 numbers or 1999 numbers. I'll have to go back and look just to see literally how long I've had my RCDD. But anyways, when I got my bump, when I got my RCDD, hello, Mark, how you doing? Glad to see you back. When I got my RCDD, first off, they didn't want to give me a bump. They didn't want to give me a raise because I got my RCDD. So what I did was I just went out and did some job searching, and I did some interviews, and I found some other companies in the area and what they were willing to pay me. Well, I didn't want to leave my company, so I went back to my company and said, after I had an offer letter, I said, look, here's what they're willing to pay me. And my company looked at that and they go, we can't pay you that. I'm like, okay, I don't necessarily want you to match it, but I want something. I want you to realize that I'm now worth more to the company. And I did get a bump. And that bump was about 7% of my salary. So that was a pretty good significant bump, right? So that does help. So you keep all those kind of things in mind when it comes to salary. They're way all over the place, right? So Fernando asked me, I would like to become a trainer in the future, but I don't know how to start. Okay, that's a great question, Fernando. So to be successful as a trainer, there are 3 things that you need to have, and I call this the hat trick. If you know hockey, you know what a hat trick is. A hat trick means 3 goals by one of the teams. So this is what I call the trifecta to be a good trainer. First off, you have to have the knowledge. And when I say the knowledge, I don't necessarily mean the book knowledge. Having the book knowledge is great. Don't get me wrong. You have to be able to walk the walk. When you're sitting here and you're teaching people, they have to gather the sense that you're not just somebody who studied this material and now you're trying to teach it to them. But you'll get more respect if they understand that you were an installer or you were a project manager. Some people call that street credit, right? So you have to have that kind of experience. And then the second thing that you have to get, you have to be good at, you have to get a certification, right? You have to be, you're going to get like an RCDD or a Bixby technician certificate, or if you're in the computer industry, one of the computer certifications, or if you're trying to teach project management, the PMP certification or the Bixby project management certification is going to go a long way with helping you have the students understand you, right? And then the third thing that you need to have, and this is the hard one. This is the hard one. At speaking in people. Now, a lot of people, when I sit in classes, they look at me and they go, Chuck, man, you're a great speaker. To be quite honest, every single time I start up a class, before I started up today's thing, my stomach was in all kinds of nerves. It's natural. You just got to learn how to channel that. You got to learn you got to watch your filler words like, you got to watch your hand language, and you got to do your inflection. You got to be able to read read the crowd, right? To understand if you're losing them or not, right? So, and that's most people who become trainers, they're good at getting the experience. They're good at getting the certifications, but they're not so good at the public speaking part. Now, there are some things that you can do, Fernando. You can, for example, what's a place? It's called Toastmasters, I think, where it's a group where people basically they gather together and you learn how to do public speaking. Now, what kind of helped me was, number one, I've been a trainer for way too long that I want to admit, but when I got my college degree, I got it through the University of Phoenix. Now, the University of Phoenix, every week you had to stand up and do a presentation to the group, and so did your group. So for 4 years, I was getting up doing, speaking to people, and you kind of learn and get at that. And then Georgia has actually a great point. You have to have patience for it, right? You do have to be very patient and understand. Like, for example, I taught a class yesterday, a virtual class, and we had 40 plus people in that virtual class. Now, at the beginning of every class, I always ask them, what is their experience level? Because that way I know what level to teach the class, right? If I find that most people in the class have, for example, 1 year experience, well, then I'm going to focus deep in on the color code. If I find they got 20 plus years experience, well, then I'm going to kind of skim over the color code, right? So you have to be able to understand that and be able to read that crowd. So that's what I said. That's why I don't like virtual classes, because you don't have the eye contact. You can't watch the body language. If someone's sitting there like this, you're losing them, right? So those are all skills that you can develop and you can learn. If you're on LinkedIn has a great learning platform that you can pay for, I think like once a year or something like that. And they got a whole bunch of free training. There's a lot of classes on there about public speaking and training and teaching. I suggest you watch those as well. So I hope that answered your question good enough for you, Fernando. If not, let me know what else you may need to know about training, and I certainly will help you with that. So then the next question I got was, and this one came to me via email, and it says, Chuck, how deep should I bury my outside plant fiber cable? Well, it depends. I hate to answer every question like that, but it does. I mean, the more information you can give me in the question, the more precise I can be with my answer. So this was kind of like a wide open question. So the first thing that you're going to have to depend on is you got to find out what is the frost line for the area that you live in. Now, what I mean by frost line is that's how deep you got to go before the ground quits freezing because there's moisture in the ground. Well, I live in West Central Florida. I live about an hour north of Tampa. Our frost line is literally like 1 inch, 1 inch. But if you go up to like the Northeast, like, we were talking about Massachusetts earlier, that could be as high as, 20 inches deep. You got to dig below that. So the frost line is the first determining factor. The next determining factor is, that's the second determining factor. The first determining factor is, what does your authority having jurisdiction say, right? What do they say how deep you got buried? That's the first thing you got to go. And generally, they're going to go below the frost line as well. So that saves you from having to research that. So you need to know what that is. And another thing, and safety tip, before you start digging any holes to do trenches, call Miss Utility, right? At least that's what we used to call it. I don't know if they call it anymore, but Miss Utility is a service. You can call them up and you say, look, I'm going to be doing some digging in this area, and they will send somebody out and they will mark all the telephone, all the electrical cables that are buried, so that way you don't dig into one of those, and also gas as well. Just be super careful, because I used to know a guy that used to work for Miss Utility, and they said sometimes they were wrong. So, there you go. So George says local code. Yeah, that's what I said. When I say the authority having jurisdiction, George, that's what I mean. I mean the local code. That's what that actually means, right? And then when you dig the trench, so when you dig the trench and you're going to put your cable in that trench, generally, we like to put our fiber optic cable in a conduit. And the most common conduit that we like to use is a PVC conduit. Put a rock on, you got to put the conduit in, the cable inside the conduit, and then you got to layer it up with different types of material. And then you should also put, especially if using PVC conduit and an all dielectric fiber optic cable, all dielectric, meaning there's no metal inside of it, then you got to put a marker no greater than 12 inches under the surface. And that marker should be detectable. That way, if somebody starts digging, they're going to dig into that marker and they're going to realize, hey, there's something buried here, and I got to be careful. Now, if you're in an area where you're worried about what's called conduit shear, or if you're in an area where there's movement, or you have going underneath a street or parking lot, well, then you might want to encase that conduit in concrete. But you don't necessarily want to go straight to conduit, because that causes other problems as well. You only want to do that when you actually have to. And then pro tip number 2 for the day. Thank you, George. I was just getting ready. You got to put mule tape inside of that, and you make sure that mule tape is capable of up to 1,250 pounds tensile strength. Make sure you leave mule tape. That's the number one. Now, with that all being said, I did look it up in the telecom distributions methods manual, the TDMM, and it does say a minimum of 24 inches. A minimum of 24 inches. So there you go. But again, it really all depends on where you live and all that other fun stuff. So then the next question I got, this one came to me via email, and it says, Chuck, can I use D-rings to dress my cable in the telecom room instead of a ladder rack? Now, for those who may not know what a D-ring is, a D-ring is aluminum, or sometimes it's plastic, and it looks like a D, and then it's got flanges, and you screw it to the wall, and then you put your cable through the D-ring, or your cross connect through that D-ring. It's really made for telephony, and it's really made, you can put some cable inside of it, but it should be small bundles. High performance data cabling, no, you don't want to do that, because again, high performance data cabling, you don't want to deform that jacket, and you don't want the weight of those cables crushing the thing. So you generally want to stay away from that. And by the way, D-ring should not replace ladder rack, period. That's just the end of that one. Right. So then the next question, again, I'm watching the comments, so I'm waiting for if anybody has any questions. So the next one is, this one came to me via LinkedIn message. Chuck, do I have to use a breakout kit for my outside plant fiber? Now, for those of you who know what a breakout kit is, they're also called fan-out kits. They're also called a furcating harness. Right. So when you're doing outside plant cable, generally the fiber strands are going to be 250 micron, which is pretty stinking small. So what a furcating harness does is you can buy them in 6 and 12 strands. Those are the most common ones. They're the tubes, and they're colored, the same color code as the strands in the fiber. And so these tubes are all connected to a piece of plastic that the tubes go into. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the housing, you're going to attach that to the cable jacket. You're going to take the cable, you're going to tape it to the table. You take your furcating harness, take that little square piece, and you tape it to the side of the table. And then you take the blue fiber strand and you put it in the blue tube. Orange goes to the orange, green goes to the green. You get the idea. And then when you get done, you can go ahead and untape it. You can kind of bring it back up and kind of, gently bring it back into the harness and then close the harness up. Why do we use a fan out kit? We use a fan out kit because it builds up that strand to make it easier to handle, easier to terminate, and also it's going to make the connector a little bit more resilient, so it's less likely to break. Now, you only use a fan out kit inside the building. Inside the building. You don't use them outside the building. So if you're doing a splice in a maintenance hall or something like that, you're not going to use a fan out kit there, right? So, and Fernando says that's a common question about the fan out kit. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And then the last question that I got, the question came in via email. Again, if you have questions, put them in the comments below. And if you're watching this on YouTube, put it in send me a message on LinkedIn, stuff like that. This came via email, so this person obviously knows me. And it says, Chuck, I am troubleshooting a voice cable at a local insurance company. While I'm there, the customer asked me to please fix another phone that had static on the line. How do I fix static on the line? Okay, so static on the line is an easy, well, not necessarily easy, but let me tell you something. The first thing you want to do is, let me grab a tool real quick. The first thing you're going to want to do is take a bud set or bud in set, and you're going to click it on the, this is actually from Tempo. I got to do a video for Low Voltage Nation. I haven't forgotten about you guys. I'll get that video cranked out, Mr. Blake, and soon. And then I'll get this back to Tempo because they're just loaning this to me. So I got to get this back to them. So you can take that bud in set and you're going to put it on what's called the demarcation point. The demarcation point. It's usually indicated by orange covers, orange backboard, something like that. And then once you find that demarcation point, you want to disconnect where that cable goes into the switch. So that way it's isolated. And then click it on and listen. Is there still static? Well, if there is still static, then you call the service provider and say, hey, dude, you got to come out and fix this cable. Because it could be anything. It could be a loose connection. It could be something in the central office. It could be anything. But if there is no static, then the next most common thing that I've found that causes static on a phone line is the lightning protection. To be more specific, the block type of lightning protection system. So lightning protection systems have three types of fuses. You have a carbon block, gas tube protector, and solid state protector. Let me know if you're interested. I'll do a show on that if you want to know more about that. So if you do, put in the comments. Chuck, do one on that subject because it's pretty actually interesting. So the carbon block they're actually considered legacy, right? You're not supposed to be using them anymore, and they're the entry level protection. So what happens is with a carbon block, they generally trigger somewhere between 300 and 1,000 volts, and they trigger at about 15 nanoseconds, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on the model, which is an eternity. 15 nanoseconds sounds like pretty quick, but it is an eternity when you got a piece of equipment that's getting hit with 1,000 volts, right? Legacy. The problem is in some areas of the country, like for example, I live in Central Florida. We are the lightning capital of the United States, right? So that means that in this area, if I was putting a lightning protection system, I would not use carbon blocks because when a bolt of lightning strikes the ground, even though it might be a mile away, you get a barrage in the ground and then it falls back down again, right? That wears out lightning protectors. And a lot of times what happens is as they start to get worn out from multiple lightning strikes nearby, not direct lightning strikes, they will develop static on the phone. So if you've isolated that it's not the incoming dial tone, right, and you're still getting that static, replace the carbon blocks. And that will most likely take care of that system for you. So let's see. George says, Who still uses POTS when almost everywhere is VoIP? That's not actually a true statement, George. Yes, VoIP is making is gaining ground, but there are a lot of people that still use traditional plain old telephone service. That's what POT stands for, in case you didn't know that. So there you go. So that is our 30 minutes for today's show. I didn't see anybody type in any other additional questions. Right. So if you think of a question after I stop the broadcast, please feel free to put it in the comments. Feel free to email me. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn and send me a friend request, and also send me the questionnaire, and we'll answer on the next week's live Q&A by your favorite RCDD, Chuck Bowser RCDD. Till next week, everybody, be safe.